I might ask our CSC people to sit on the floor.
There are seats up at the front. I don't know if they're all taken yet.
Go ahead and just sit up on the floor any way you want to. Right? There's probably going to be more people coming in. So, what time is it? 1 minute till. What's that? 1 minute till. 1 minute till. All right.
Let's wait a few more minutes. People are still coming.
Yeah.
And people are still eating.
There's at least 3 seats here, right in front. Right, just come on in. Don't why don't we just let come in a little bit because we don't want those doorways blocked. So that will just turn on people. Floors are great. Lots of seating on the floors. I'll lunch here. The lunch is party. Now we can have lunch. Oh, that's mine. I'm sorry. Small. Yes, Casey, just put it. I'll definitely.
There are some seats up at the front.
There are at least two seats up in front. You'll be right in the public gaze, and Richard will probably ask you questions.
Right. If you're thinking of leaving in 10 minutes, I guess you should stay at the back. And then I'll notice anyway.
What time is it? 5 minutes past?
People are still arriving. So, yeah, I guess you should start introducing it. Let's not make it wait anymore. Our anticipation is already built to a fever pitch.
So, on behalf of the CSE department, I'd like to especially welcome our guests from outside CSE. So, I think there are some people from industry and some people from just software developers in town who wrote some emails to me. So, just curious, how many people outside UCSD are here? Can you put up your hands? All right, that's a good sign. We generally don't get that kind of attendance in our CSC talk. Well, this is part of the CSC Distinguished Lecturer Series, and we've had a number of distinguished lecturers, mostly of academic origin. And Richard is.
Am I an extinguished lecturer?
Well, you are. So Richard is somewhat different. He is a very renowned software designer. Most academics don't do anything useful, so I can make fun of them because I'm one of them. And Richard is very well known for creating two, I think, archetypal systems. One is clearly Emacs and GNU operating system. And he has just set numerous standards for the way things are done. And he, on a personal note, I remember being at MIT, and he was kind of a living legend at that time. And I remember being a grad student and seeing his back, and somebody telling me, "That's Richard Stallman." Right? And so now I've seen your front. So and, on another personal note, I love Emacs. After all these years, I continue to use Emacs.
Loves every user.
I continue to use Emacs. I haven't really figured out, probably a tenth of its intricacies, but it's a wonderful tool. And Richard, in recent years, has segued from a great software designer and a software writer to a social crusader, and I think that's part of what he's going to talk to you about today. Okay, please welcome Richard Stallman. With more seats, I'd rather you guys don't crowd that part because that tends to discourage.
Yes, some people could come and sit down over here.
Especially the grad students, you are braver. I know your names.
I'm not going to attack you. I'm only going to exhort you to do the ethical thing.
Which is?
Use only free software. But what is free software? What does it mean? Free software means software that respects the user's freedom. This is an issue of freedom, not price. I'm not talking about gratis software. I'm talking about freedom-respecting software. It's not a matter of giving the software away. It's a matter of treating the users ethically once they have the software. Software that is not free is proprietary software, non-free software, user-subjugating software, software that keeps the users divided and helpless. Divided because every user is forbidden to share with anybody else, and helpless because they don't have the source code, so they can't change anything or even independently verify what it's really doing. But free software respects the user's freedom. What does that mean? It's too vague to say, let's just have freedom, let's support freedom. We have to say what the freedoms are. There are 4 essential freedoms that the user of software should have, and which make the definition of free software. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it so that the program does what you wish. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help your neighbor, the freedom, that is, to distribute exact copies when you wish. And the freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community. That's the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions when you wish. If you have all 4 freedoms, then the program is free software, meaning you're free to do the useful and ethical and helpful things that people should be able to do with software. This means that the social system of the program's distribution and use is ethical. And thus the program constitutes a contribution to society, more or less. And the more or less, of course, depends on how useful the program is, on practical questions. But if one of these freedoms is substantially missing, then the program is proprietary software, which means that it doesn't respect the user's freedom, and the social system of its distribution and use is unethical. And thus, it's a bad thing to develop and distribute software like that. But why are these freedoms essential? Why define free software this way? Freedom number 2, the freedom to help your neighbor, to distribute exact copies, is essential on basic ethical grounds. So you can live an upright life as a good member of your community. If you use a program that doesn't give you freedom number 2, then you are in danger of falling into a moral dilemma at any moment when your friend says, "That's a nice program, could I have a copy?" The most basic act of friendship among computer users turns into a moral dilemma, because at that point you will have to choose between 2 evils. One evil is to give your friend a copy and violate the license of the program. The other evil is to deny your friend a copy and comply with the license of the program. Being in the dilemma, you ought to choose the lesser evil, which is to give your friend a copy and violate the license of the program. This is the lesser evil because it's directed at somebody culpable. If you can't avoid doing some kind of wrong to somebody, better to pick the kind of wrong that's done to somebody that deserves it. Now, we can presume that your friend is a good friend, a helpful person, a good member of your community, and normally deserves your cooperation. Whereas, the reason we can presume this is not that this is the only possibility, but the other case is an easy one. If it's a nasty, unhelpful person, you say, "Why should I help you?" Okay, so that case is easy. But the case of a good friend, a helpful person, that's the case that creates a dilemma. Whereas the developer of the proprietary program has deliberately attacked the social solidarity of your community. So much better you should do the wrong that's aimed at him. However, to be the lesser evil does not mean it's good. It's never a good thing to make an agreement and then break it. When an agreement is inherently evil, as this one is, breaking it is not as bad as keeping it, but still breaking it is not good. And if you do give your friend a copy, what will he have? He will have an unauthorized copy of a proprietary program. And that's a pretty bad thing, almost as bad as an authorized copy. So what you should really do, once you have fully understood this dilemma, is to make sure it never happens to you. That way, you'll never have to do any evil. There are 2 ways to avoid this dilemma. One is don't have any friends. That's the method suggested by proprietary software developers. The other method is don't use proprietary software. And that's my method. If someone offers me a program, no matter how attractive, on the condition that I promise not to share it with you, I will reject it. I will say it would be wrong for me to accept that, and therefore I do not. It would be betrayal of my community to accept such a condition. The most essential resource of any society is not a physical resource. It's a psychosocial resource. It's the spirit of goodwill, the spirit of helping your neighbor. The level of this resource makes the difference between a livable society and a dog-eat-dog jungle. So it's no accident that humanity's ethical leaders for thousands of years have explicitly tried to encourage this spirit of goodwill and benevolence. So what does it mean when powerful social institutions say that it's wrong to share with your neighbor? What are they doing? They are poisoning this vital resource, something that no society can afford. There is no society that has too much spirit of goodwill. And what does it mean when they say that if you share with your neighbor, you're a pirate? And they call it theft. What are they doing? What are they really saying? They're trying to equate helping your neighbor with attacking ships. And nothing could be more false than that, because helping your neighbor is admirable and attacking ships is very, very bad. And what does it mean when they impose harsh punishments, like even years in prison, on people who have helped their neighbors? How much fear will it take before your neighbors are too scared to share with you, or before you are too scared to share with them? I presume that you don't want to have this level of terror permeating your society. So we should put an end to the terror campaign of the proprietary software developers. And I call it a terror campaign not out of exaggeration, but because in 2 countries so far, the proprietary software developers have threatened the public with rape for having unauthorized copies of proprietary programs. And when they threaten people with rape, that is a terror campaign. So that's the reason why freedom number 2 is essential, the freedom to help your neighbor, the freedom to distribute exact copies of the program. Freedom 0 is essential for a different reason. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish, and it's essential so that you can have control of your own computing. It may be surprising to learn that there are proprietary programs that actually restrict the use of authorized copies. They restrict what computer it can be used on, or by how many people, or how much, or how long, or for what purpose. And this is obviously not having control of your computing. So freedom 0 is essential, but it's not enough, because that's just the freedom to do or not do whatever the developer has decided to implement. So the developer still has power over you, but he exercises it by deciding what's in the code. So you still don't have control. Freedom 1, therefore, is essential. The freedom to study the source code and change it so the program does what you want. With this freedom, you decide and not the developer for you. If you use a program without freedom 1, you can't even tell what it's doing. And many non-free programs contain malicious features designed to spy on the user, restrict the user, or even attack the user. For instance, spy features are very common. Spyware, it's called. One proprietary program you might have heard of that spies on the user is called Microsoft Windows. For instance, when the user of Windows, and I won't say you because, of course, you wouldn't use a program like this. When the user of Windows uses the Windows feature to search her own files for a word, Windows sends a message saying what was searched for. That's one spy feature. But there's another. When Windows XP asks for an upgrade, it sends Microsoft a list of all the programs installed on the machine. Another spy feature. Microsoft did not announce the existence of these spy features. People had to figure them out through investigation. There may be others that we don't know about. But spying is not limited to Windows. Windows Media Player also spies on the user. In fact, it does total surveillance, reporting every site that the user looks at. But please do not think that this is something unique to Microsoft because Microsoft is specially evil. Real Player spies on the user too. And I think Real Player did it first, and Microsoft just imitated it. So, yeah, that's true. Microsoft does a lot of imitation. And the TiVo spies on the user. The TiVo is a device that records all the TV channels in parallel so you can watch programs later. And it contains a lot of free software. It contains a small gnu+linux system. And some people in the free software community applauded and said, thank you, when the TiVo came out. Thank you for using our software. I think that's a bit backwards. I think when they use our software, they should thank us, and we should say, you're welcome. We should thank people when they contribute, not when they benefit from our work. But be that as it may, the TiVo also contains non-free software, and it spies on the user. And this shows that to, quote, use free software is an insufficient goal, because implicitly that means use free software for some things. And that's not enough. If we want to live in freedom, we have to set the goal of escaping from non-free software, of using exclusively free software. If you use any program that takes away your freedom, you have a problem, an ethical problem. And meanwhile, the TiVo spies on the user, and you can't fix that. So spyware is quite common, but it gets worse. There's also the functionality of refusing to function, where a program says, I don't want to show you this file. If you are carrying a portable surveillance and tracking device, please switch it off. They have already tracked you here, so they already know you're listening to me, and they will record that forever. And if they want to listen to my speech, I believe a recording will eventually be available, and they're also welcome to come to my speeches. So they don't need to turn on your telephone in listen only without ringing mode. And by the way, this talk is not being streamed because the streaming would have been done in Real Player format. And not only does Real Player spy on the users, but in general, it's impossible to receive those streams with free software. And I refuse to have my talks distributed in formats that require people to use non-free software. Talking about the medium is the message. In this case, the medium would be the message, use non-free software, which is the exact opposite of what I'm speaking about. So I don't want to show you this file. I don't want to let you copy part of this file. I'm not going to print this file for you because I don't like you. The intentionally implemented functionality of refusing to function for you, also known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management. But it gets worse. There are also backdoors, the malicious features designed to attack the user. There was a proprietary program called Interbase, which was liberated by its developer, and when the users then could see the source code, they discovered a backdoor, and they fixed it. Well, presumably that backdoor wasn't implemented just before they liberated the program. It had probably been there for years, but when the program was non-free and didn't come with freedom number one, the users couldn't tell. Another proprietary program that you've probably heard of that has a backdoor is called Microsoft Windows. When Windows asks for an upgrade, Microsoft knows more or less the identity of the user and therefore can provide to him an upgrade designed specifically for him, which means Microsoft can take complete control of his computer and the user has no recourse. This is the backdoor whose existence we can deduce from known facts. Are there others? A few years ago in India, I was told that they had arrested some programmers working on development of Windows and accused them of working also for Al-Qaeda, introducing another backdoor that Microsoft was not supposed to know about. Apparently, that attempt failed. Whether there were others that succeeded, we have no way of checking. But we do know that Microsoft was caught in 1999 having introduced a backdoor on behalf of an even more violent terrorist organization, the U.S. government, specifically the National Security Agency, into a piece of server software. And they may have done the same thing in other places, and we have no way of telling. And Microsoft occasionally offers other governments a chance to study the source code, but they don't actually give a copy of the source code that the other government could recompile. No, they have a special server that one could log in on to single step. So if Microsoft put in another backdoor, they presumably left it out in that server so as to preserve its secrecy. What does this show us? It shows us that every non-free program that doesn't give you freedom number one demands blind faith from the user, and that this blind faith is never justified by the circumstances. Every non-free program is just trust me software, and you never can. So there are two classes of non-free programs. There are the ones in which we know of malicious features, and the ones in which we don't know of any malicious features. And maybe they don't have any, because there are proprietary software developers that don't put in malicious features, or maybe they do have malicious features that we are in ignorance of. And there's never a way to tell which. But what about those proprietary software developers that don't implement malicious features? They're human, so they make mistakes. Their code has bugs. And the user of a program without freedom number one is just as helpless facing an accidental bug as she is facing a deliberate malicious feature. If you use a program without freedom number one, you are a prisoner of your software. We, the developers of free software, are human too. So we also make mistakes, and our code also has bugs. Every non-trivial program probably has bugs. The difference is, if you run into a bug in our code, you can fix it, because you have the source code, and you can change it. We can't make ourselves perfect, but we can, and we do, respect your freedom. However, freedom one is not enough. Freedom one is the freedom to study and change the source code. That is, for you or for a company to do so itself. But this is not enough, because there are millions of people who use computers and don't know how to program. So they are not capable of directly exercising freedom number one. But even for us programmers, freedom one is not enough, because there's just too much free software. There's too much software, and it all ought to be free. So nobody is so smart as to be able to study and personally master all the software that she uses and then personally make all the changes she might want. The only way we can fully take control of our computing is to do it working together, cooperating. And for this we need freedom three, the freedom to contribute to your community, the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions when you wish. With this freedom, we can cooperate. Suppose there are 1 million users of some free program, 1 million users, that is, that want a certain change. There may be others that don't want it, but these million do want it. Well, we can expect there will be a few thousand of them that know how to program, and sooner or later some of them will make this change and publish their modified version, and all those million users can switch to it. They don't need to know how to program to install that version. And once they've heard everybody else saying, oh, this is so good, we like this feature and it works well, then they'll do it. and thus they all get the benefit of the four freedoms. All the users get the benefits of the four freedoms. Every user can directly exercise freedom 0 and freedom 2, the freedom to run the program as you wish and the freedom to distribute exact copies when you wish. These don't require programming, so everyone can do them. Freedoms 1 and 3, the freedom to study and change the source code and then distribute your modified version if you wish, these entail programming. So any given person can only do these things up to the point where he knows how to program. Of course, that's not a binary thing. Lots of people learn some programming and they can make some easy changes, and that's quite useful. Just as there are many people that learn to do some maintenance on their cars even though they don't have the skill to be a professional mechanic, and that's quite useful. With free software, everyone's encouraged to learn as much as she wants to learn, even if that isn't everything. So freedoms 1 and 3 can only be exercised by any given person to the point where he knows how to program. But when programmers exercise these freedoms and distribute their modified versions, all the users get the benefit of their contributions. So all users need the 4 freedoms. They need everybody to have the 4 freedoms, not just themselves. And the combined result of these 4 freedoms is democracy. Free software develops in a democratic fashion under the control of its users. Everybody gets to participate as much as she wants to. By contrast, a proprietary program's development is under the control of one developer. That developer decides what the program does and imposes that on the users. So the proprietary program is a vehicle to impose the power of that developer on the users. The users decide how free software develops, not by all voting on a decision that then gets imposed on everyone, but rather by all contributing the way they want to. So if a lot of people want progress in this direction, a lot of people will make improvements going in this direction, and so there will be a lot of progress. If only a few people want progress in this direction, occasionally somebody, most likely occasionally someone will make changes, and probably the progress in this direction won't be so fast. And if the users don't want it to go in this direction, it won't. Because if anybody did publish a version that goes in that direction, the users will reject it. Malicious features are essentially impossible in free software because nobody's in a position to impose them. With proprietary software, the developer knows he can impose that malicious feature on the users. Their only recourse is to walk away. And as we can see from the society around us, a situation where there's somebody with a lot of clout who can decide how something works and everybody else only gets to take it or leave it is a situation that gives a lot more power to that one concentrated party. That's why that's a bad way to organize society. That's why we need other democratic methods to give the public at large more control, more clout in these decisions. But with free software, if I tried to put in a malicious feature, somebody else would delete it and publish an improved version which doesn't have the malicious feature. And everyone would switch to that, and my version would die. And I know this in advance. So I wouldn't be tempted, even if I were not ethical, and if my conscience didn't stop me, I would realize I won't get away with it. So this is a good thing for keeping people honest, that nobody's in a position of power over anybody else. But what if there are just 1,000 people that want a certain change in a free program, and suppose none of them knows how to program? They can still take advantage of the 4 freedoms to get what they want. Here's how. They can make an announcement so that they get in touch with each other and start an organization to make the change. The idea is that everybody will join and pay dues, and so the organization will have money to make the change. So, for instance, if it's a medium-sized change and we'll need a good programmer to work for a month, that might cost $10,000. So they could say to everybody, please join and pay $10 dues. And if they join, they'll have enough money. Or they might figure only half the people will join, so please join and pay $20. Well, of course, to actually do the change, they have to choose somebody to hire. So they would talk to one group of programmers and say, can you do this? When could you do it? How much would you charge? Let's see your portfolio so we can tell if you do a good job. And then they could ask another group and decide. And this shows an interesting thing, that free software carries with it a free market for all kinds of support and services. By contrast, the support for a proprietary program is typically a monopoly, because only the developer has the source code, only the developer can make any change. A user who wants to change has to beg and plead, oh, almighty developer, please make this change for me. Sometimes the developer says, pay us and we'll listen to your problem. If the user does this, the developer says, in 6 months there will be an upgrade. Buy the upgrade and you'll see if we fixed your problem, and you'll see what new problems we have in store for you. But with free software, anybody that has a copy can study the source code, master it, and begin offering support. So it's a free market. And therefore, all those institutional and business users that really value good support and consider that important should be insisting on free software so that they can get the best support for their money. With free software, there's real competition for support. Now, this leads us to a paradox. Usually, when there's a choice of products to do something, we say there's no monopoly. But when there's a choice of proprietary software products to do a job, yes, there is monopoly, because the user who chooses this proprietary software product then falls into this monopoly for support. But if she chooses this proprietary software product, she falls into this monopoly for support. So it's, yes, there is monopoly. There's a choice between monopolies, but there's no way to escape from monopoly in proprietary software. The only way to escape from monopoly is to escape from proprietary software, to escape to the free world. And that's the aim of the free software movement, to help all computer users escape from proprietary software and escape to freedom. The free world is the new continent that we have built in cyberspace, because our aim is to liberate all of cyberspace. But what we have been able to do so far is to build a new continent which is free. You can't be free living in the feudal society of proprietary software where every program has its lord who lords it over the users. But you can come to the free world. And because this is a virtual continent, it has room for everyone. And because we built it, we didn't have to displace any indigenous peoples. At this point, this paradox is an example of an important and deep principle. Freedom is something much bigger than having a choice between a few fixed options. Freedom means having control of your own life. So anytime somebody tries to philosophically analyze freedom and starts by saying freedom means freedom of choice, now you'll recognize the error. That person has already thrown away most of what freedom means and kept just a little piece of it. At that point, it will be easy for him to prove that this piece isn't really so important anyway, and claim that he's talking about freedom, but really he's not. Now you'll recognize the fallacy here. To have a choice between proprietary programs is being able to choose your master. Freedom means not having a master. And when you're using software, freedom means that the software you use is free. I've now finished explaining the reasons why the four freedoms are essential, why software must be free, why you should insist on free software. The development of proprietary software is not a contribution to society because the proprietary software's social system of distribution and use is a social problem, and our aim is to correct that problem so that all users will be free. I reached these ideas, although in a basic form, not as clearly as I can present them now, in 1983, and I decided I wanted to use computers in freedom and make it possible for others to do so. But how? I was just one man, not famous outside the narrow field of editor developers, and with no particular political skill or experience. I didn't think I'd be able to convince governments to change their laws or convince companies to change their practices. So how could I bring this freedom about? Well, there was one thing I was very good at, and that was developing operating system software. And it occurred to me that I could do this, I could achieve this goal by developing software, because the problem existed. The reason why nobody could be free using computers at that time was that all the operating systems for modern computers were proprietary. So if I developed another operating system and made it free, which I could do myself being the author, then this would give everybody a way to use computers in freedom. This would make it possible. So I had figured out a way to solve this social problem through technical work, using my principal skill. So this meant that I was aware of a social problem which most people didn't recognize as a social problem. I had the skills necessary to try to solve it, and probably no one was going to do it if I didn't. That meant I was elected by circumstances to do this work. It's as if you see someone drowning, and you know how to swim, and no one else is around, and it's not Bush, then you have a moral duty to save that person. That's too strong. There are a bunch of other U.S. officials and a lot of legislators who are also in favor of the occupation of another country, so I guess you don't have to save them either. Well, I don't know how to swim, but in this case, the job that needed doing was not swimming, it was developing software, and that's what I knew how to do. So I decided I would develop a free software operating system, or die trying, of old age, presumably, because at the time, the free software movement that I was just starting had no active enemies. Lots of people disagreed with us, but they generally just laughed and went away and ignored us. So the obstacle was not opposition, it was a large pile of programs we would have to develop to have a sufficient free operating system. And at the time, lots of people said, oh, that would be a great thing, but it's such a big job you'll never be able to do it. And I didn't know that they were wrong. Nobody knew if we would ever have a free operating system. But when you're fighting for freedom, you can't afford to wait until victory is in sight before you start. Because if you do that, you'll miss most of the opportunities. You have to start when you don't know if you're going to win, but maybe you'll win. My decision to develop this system, not by myself, of course. The next thing I decided was to recruit other people to help. But that led me to other decisions, technical design decisions. What kind of system should it be? I decided to make it a Unix-compatible operating system because that way it would be portable. You see, at that time there were many popular computer architectures, and every so often a new one was introduced, and I realized that it would take years to finish an operating system. Maybe 5 is what I thought. So, and in that time, computers could change. So in order to make sure it wasn't obsolete before it was done, I had better make sure it was portable. And Unix was the only successful portable operating system I knew of. By following the design of Unix, I'd have a good chance of making a portable system. In addition, because Unix was popular, compatibility with Unix was useful because a lot of users would be able to switch easily without relearning much. But this decision to make the system upward compatible with Unix led to an interesting consequence because it made all the other initial design decisions. Because Unix consists of many components, hundreds back then, and they communicate with each other through interfaces more or less documented. And mostly the users used the same interfaces to talk to these programs. So to be compatible with Unix meant keeping the same interfaces, which meant replacing these components one by one compatibly. So the initial design decisions, the ones that had to be made at the beginning, were made. And the only thing I needed to start work was a name. Now, in the 1970s, I was part of a community of programmers who shared software. That's how I learned to appreciate the free software way of life, and that's how I knew it was good. I wasn't just envisioning something that had never been tried and figuring it would probably be good. I had lived it, so I knew it was good. And in that community, we programmed mainly for the joy of programming, for the fascination. Now, many of us were employees, and the majority, I guess, were students, but that was all secondary. That wasn't why we were doing this. We were programming because it was wonderful fun. And to make it even more fun, we often chose funny or even naughty names for our programs. Because, thinking of the users being amused by the name makes it all the more of a pleasure to finish the program and get the users. In this community, we called ourselves hackers. And what that meant was we were programming for the fascination. We were using our intelligence cleverly in a playful spirit in programming and in other areas of life too. And that's what it means to be a hacker, to have fun using your intelligence with playful cleverness in any field of life. In the 1300s, Guillaume de Machaut wrote a piece of music that's a palindrome. And its name means my end is my beginning. The words are about being a palindrome. And it actually sounds good, too, because he was a good composer, a great composer, in fact. And this was hacking. There were no computers, but you don't need computers to do playful cleverness. The idea that hacking has to do with breaking security, that was an error committed by journalists around 1980. In fact, one can hack in any medium. So, in our community, we had a particular custom of naming. You see, back then, programming was not portable. So all around the computing field, it was quite common. You would see a useful, interesting program, and you'd like to be able to do that on your computer, but that program was written for a different kind of computer. So the only way you could do it was to write another program to do it. So you would do that. In our community, when we did that, we had this particular tradition or custom that you could give the program a name that's a recursive acronym saying that your program is not the other one. It's a humorous way of giving credit. So, for instance, in '75, I developed the first Emacs text editor. That was an extensible programmable text editor. You could reprogram the editor in the middle of your session. After that, there were some 30 imitations of Emacs, and some of them were called this or that Emacs. But one was called Fine, for Fine is not Emacs. And there was Sign, for Sign is not Emacs. And there was Ina, for Ina is not Emacs. And, well, I'll get into that. And there was Mince, for Mince is not complete Emacs. And the second version of Ina was called Zwei, which stood for Zwei was Ina initially. So you can have a lot of fun with recursive acronyms, plenty of scope for playful cleverness. I looked for a recursive acronym for something is not Unix, but none of those combinations had another meaning, and without another meaning, it's not funny. So what could I do? Well, I thought I could make a contraction and get rid of the I, and then I would have a 3-letter recursive acronym, blank NU. So I started going through all the alphabet. Anu, Bnu, Knu, Dnu, Enu, Fnu, GNU. Well, GNU is the funniest word in the English language. So, given a specific, meaningful reason to use that as the name for a particular project, I couldn't resist. Now, why is the word GNU so funny? Because according to the dictionary, the G is silent and it's pronounced new. So anytime you were going to write new, you could write it GNU and you've got a joke. Maybe not a very good one, but there are lots of them. And sometimes it is used in a really funny joke. For instance, there was a funny song based on the word GNU when I was a child. So much humor I couldn't resist. But when it's the name of our system, please do not obey the dictionary. If you call it the new system, you'll get users very confused. You see, we've been working on it for 23 years now and using it for about 15, so it's not new anymore. But it still is GNU, and it always will be GNU, no matter how many people pronounce it Linux by mistake. But how did that error get started? Well, during the 1980s, the work of the GNU project, which meant everybody I could convince to help, was to develop all these hundreds of components that we would need for a sufficient operating system. In 1990, we had everything that was really necessary except the kernel, which is one of the major important components. The kernel is the program that allocates the computer's resources to all the other programs that you run. Now, we started developing a kernel in 1990, and I chose a rather advanced design, which seems to have some problems. We've never been able to make that kernel work well enough for people to really start using it. Fortunately, we did not have to wait, because in 1991, a college student in Finland developed his own kernel using the traditional monolithic design, and he got it to barely work in less than a year. That kernel was called Linux, and initially it was not free software. Its initial license